Call to order the New York City Audit Committee meeting of December the 7th. Sorry. Just before the meeting, I opened the meeting yesterday, and I forgot to say it. Let me say it now. We're in the holiday season, so I want to wish everybody
sorry,
the
you just have
best
to speak
and
into
the
the
best in
microphone.
the new year. Jackie, you want to-
Bernie Rosen, Chairperson.
Present.
Mark Kaplan.
Present.
Michael Spitzer.
Present.
Bud Larson.
Present.
Representing Comptroller Scott Stringer, Michelle Mark Levine.
Present.
Representing Mayor de Blasio, Nicole Fleming.
Present.
Representing Public Advocate Letitia James, Larry Schimmel.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Okay. The minutes from the last meeting, it was all executive session, but we, just for the record, we ought to ask for an approval.
I move approval.
I second.
Okay, thank you.
Next one.
That's better. Okay, good. Hearing no objections, the minutes are accepted. You folks are from EDC?
Yes.
Okay. Want to start?
Sure. So, good morning. I'm Kim Vicari. I'm the CFO of EDC, and I'd just like to introduce my team. We have Rafet Osman, who is our Deputy Controller. Spencer Hobson is our EVP and Director of Finance. Fred Descoli is our Controller, and Lou Roberts is a representative of Ernst & Young, who is our outside auditors, and with him is Chris Sullivan. Sorry.
Okay.
So we're here today to review not only EDC, but we'll also be going over the IDA financials, Build NYC financials, the New York City Resource Corporation, and the New York City Neighborhood Capital Corporation.
Okay.
So I think the way that we'd like to do it is turn it over to Fred Descoli, and we'll concentrate on EDC first, and we'll give you a quick recap of how we did financially this year, and then we'll open it up for questions on EDC, and then we'll move on to the next.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, dear.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kim. And thank you, members of the Audit Committee. The first financials we'll be going over is the New York City Economic Development Corporation itself.
Is his mic on?
It is. Just gotta
Is
be
it on?
closer.
Okay. I think so. Is that better? Yeah, just
Good.
closer. So the bottom line results on the statement of net position, which is page 12, the first of the financial statements in the EDC financial statements.
Page 12 of the EDC.
Page 12 of the EDC financials, and the financials, I should say, start with the the auditor's report, which is the the first 3 pages. It goes into the MD&A, which is a description of the high level of financials, then the financials themselves and the footnotes, and culminates with some supplemental information and a government accounting standards opinion from E&Y. So I should start by saying that Ernst & Young's opinion on the financials has been unmodified, or what we would call unqualified, meaning that it's a clean opinion. So they've reviewed the financials and they didn't have any findings on them.
Okay.
Okay. And to talk about the financials themselves, the first financial statement, which is the statement of net position, which is the equivalent of a balance sheet, is found on page 12. That statement has assets of $1,027 million and liabilities of $600 million for a net position of $426 million.
It was a good year.
It was a good year. It was a good year for us, which we'll talk about when we get to the income statement next. But it's important to know that the net position of $426 million is actually split into 3 categories. One category is restricted, which is about $100 million, and that's assets that we hold but don't necessarily belong to us. Escrows, deposits, money given in advance, things of that nature. There's another $30 million, which is the assets that we have on our books, which is the other portion that's really not really liquid, and then the remaining $300 million is what we have in accessible liquid resources. I should mention that of that 300, over 200 million of it is committed to contracts we've already entered into, and we've actually created another disclosure that's in the financials this year to point that out to the readers of the financials, so they know that there's monies that are here that have already been sort of spoken for. And you also notice that on the balance sheet itself, that a majority of the assets are made up of amounts due from the city or restricted assets, which is indicative of the nature of the business that we're in. Then if I could flip to the next page, which is page 13, and this is the income statement, you'll get a flavor for how we do business, which is really a flow-through entity. You'll see that the grants line, the largest line item on this statement, is almost $600 million. That's money that we get from the city or the federal government or other grantees that we then route to programs, and whether they be capital or programmatic different projects like the siphon project or the CDBG type work. Those under expenses, you'll see the first two lines, which is the project and program expenses. Those two lines almost equal the same $600 million. So of the $900 million that we receive in revenues, $600 million comes from the city in the form of grants or the federal government. And of the $800 million we have in expenses, almost $600 of that is for the programs and projects related to those monies. And then it's also important to note that although we spend that much money, on our balance sheet we have virtually no assets to speak of because all those assets go back to the city and are put on their books. Then the next line item under rentals, which is $191 million, that is the property rentals that we receive from managing the properties on behalf of the city. A lot of that money gets paid back to the city or is utilized in expenses relative to those pieces of property themselves. I'd like to draw your attention just to the real estate sales line item, which is the last line item under revenues. That $96 million is a new high water mark. That is the reason for us having the great year that you mentioned before. That more or less fell to the bottom line, which created at the bottom line a net increase in position of almost $100 million.
If I could just ask you on the superstorm Sandy, I sit on the board of the Health and Hospitals Corporation, and I was told that EDC is involved in the reimbursements from Superstorm Sandy, I guess.
For the Health and Hospitals.
For the Health and
Yeah, we are actually doing 3 projects for them, building new hospitals for them. So it's projects for them, but they're being handled through
It's
our
a lot of
capital
money
program. It's over $1 billion. So that'll flow through EDC, but it's for the hospitals for Health and Hospitals.
It's about $1.7 billion in total. That'll
Yes.
flow through your books?
Yes.
It'll
Flow through
our
and then you'll
books,
show
but the assets
disbursement.
itself
Okay.
will not remain on our
Right.
books. Similar to this.
But even, they've gotten some money, I know, they've spent some money, that has flowed through you people too?
Yes, we've already started. I think we're starting on the second hospital. One isn't completed, but we're doing 3 in conjunction with the rebuilding of the hospitals. One of them is in Coney Island.
Yeah, I know
So we
Coney
have started.
Island, this
we
would
have
be
started
over
that.
$900 million, it's gonna
Yep.
get a new building.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Go
welcome.
right ahead.
You're welcome. So the income statement, bottom line, for the fiscal year ending, we had a
any
$100 million favorable results of operations, which flowed through to the $426 million net position. The next page, which is page 14, this is our statement of cash flows, and it's a fairly complicated, lengthy statement, but it basically indicates that we've, from a cash basis, generated $68 million worth of cash from operations. We've purchased $100 million worth of investments. So the net change in cash on these statements is a negative $44 million, but that basically is indicative of moving cash into investments and out of cash. So it's not a bad thing, it's just a different flavor of our resources. Then on page 42, I want to mention this because it's a government auditing standards section, and it's again a report from our auditors that indicates that there weren't any exceptions noted when they reviewed our internal controls. I'm happy to answer any questions.
The internal control, go ahead, sir.
No, our auditors review our internal controls. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, the foundation of our audit is the assessment of internal controls. So we look at the significant processes that EDC has for recording the transaction, and based on our test of controls, as well as the results of our year-end testing of transactions, we didn't identify any weaknesses in their internal controls this year.
So there was no management letter?
So last year, we had a significant deficiency related to the revenue recognition, and as part of this year's procedures, we looked at the processes that EDC put in place to mitigate, the issues that we found last year. But as a result of there being no issues, we didn't have any management letter comments to publish.
Mark, you had a question?
On your page 13, you have something for contracts and other expenses to the city.
Right.
Just the language, it's either, are there other expenses not to the city? Is that the implication here?
Well,
I
yeah,
thought it
those
might
are
be-
contractual, like for instance, the 42 DP, the proceeds from a lot of the property management that we generate are by contract flow back to the city.
We also operate under 2 contracts with the city. We have a master contract and a maritime contract, and under those contracts, we have to make quarterly payments. As Fred said, we have to turn over the 42 DP revenue to the city. We have to turn over some pilot revenue. So we have a number of different agreements with the city that flow through us, but we actually owe it to the city at the end of the year. So that's why we call them contracts.
No, I understand, I just think the wording. One other comment, that I see a lot of the financial statements in the billions, and I've rarely seen those carried for the last dollar. And most of the ones I see are rounded to the nearest thousand or something like that. You guys
No,
are-
but you're using full dollars, it's good, all right.
Yeah.
No, you can't have something this big that's accurate to that number.
Yeah, there's.
We try.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback on that, I believe that National Government Finance Officers Association actually recommends rounding to thousands.
Rounding to thousands.
Good
Support
point.
from-
What is the source of most of the grants?
The city capital.
Pardon me?
City capital.
Capital
Yep.
grants?
Yep.
From-
Mostly city capital for projects that we do throughout
From the city?
Yep.
From the,
And then we also, obviously, we get the
I'm sorry, dear?
we get CDBG grants, and then we get city capital, we call that a grant. We get some FEMA, but most of it is CDBG and just pure city capital.
Okay.
One other thing, I noticed there's no statement here about the bank balances, whether they're collateralized or not.
Oh, that's actually there.
We do have the
think
same
he does
statement
have
that
the
we
Is it in
did.
the back somewhere?
Yeah.
I didn't notice it. Maybe I was wrong there.
I'll let you handle that.
I think maybe footnote 10.
These are different. Okay, sorry, I got there. I caught it early. You got a word missing someplace in footnote 5, but I give you that.
Thank you.
Note
for the odds and ends.
Just following up on Mark's point, and it's on page 27, where you did have cash deposits of 182 million, you're saying 12 million was covered by FDIC, and the remaining is uncollateralized.
That's my point. Thank you
But it's
for rescuing me.
Yeah, I thought you'd raise it up.
And that's a high number.
Right. I know we've had this discussion before the committee before.
Please say you got 175 million June 30.
Well, it is, they are sitting in money market mutual funds, but they are not collateralized. And that's because our general counsel doesn't believe we're the type of entity that would prevail in the FDIC failure of our host bank because of the type of entity we are.
Right, so what we did last year, I think, or the year before, is we started using a sweep account. So every night our balances are swept into a government security account, and then they're brought back the next morning. We do that with JP Morgan, and we do that with Wells. So that's sort of the way that we collateralize our balances. is a way around the legal restrictions we have against collateralization. You'll see the IDA, because it is a not-for-profit or an LTC, is collateralized. So we'll come up with a workaround.
On page 39, you try to summarize from October 2012 to 16, repairs and expenses related to Sandy. So that's pretty much what's come in to date and
Correct.
gone out.
Correct.
But there's a lot more to come. I
Oh,
mean,
sure. That's, go ahead.
If I just wanted to, this is particularly for.
I'm sorry?
These are particularly for the properties that EDC manages, the health and hospitals, projects that you mentioned earlier.
Wouldn't that be on this?
No.
Okay.
Right.
So this is just,
Properties that EDC specifically manages.
So it's for our, it's the Superstorm Sandy funding we got for our own assets.
Okay.
As opposed to the numerous projects we're doing for other agencies
So this-
across the city.
This is the emergency repair work that was done.
so this is for your markets that maybe been damaged?
The
or
waterfronts,
this or
the
that, I
property,
see,
piers,
I
yeah.
see.
Let me pick up on this custodial business. If you look at page 28, you say investment securities are exposed to custodial credit risk if the security is uninsured and are not registered. Now, the last part's fine, but if you have insured securities that are held by a bad custodian, you still have that risk.
Sure.
Well, this language doesn't say
I mean,
that.
custodial risk is, it's just an identified risk that everybody
No,
has.
I understand that, but you say that investment securities exposed to custodial credit risk if the securities uninsured. Even if they're insured, if they're held by a third party and that third party goes broke, you've got a problem. So it's not, it's only if it's in your name that you don't have the custodial risk or you hold it on your names. This language is a little
Take a look at that
not
language.
quite right. I'll look at it anyhow.
Mr. Rosen, if I may?
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you. I'm just curious, one of the larger programs that EDC has been mentioned recently has been around the BQX, and the program for the rail link between Queens and Brooklyn. Is there any, I didn't see anything related to that in here. Is there any encumbrances, anything that's being done in order for that program? It's a very large number.
Sure. So right now, we're just like in the study phase, and we have funded a study that PB is doing. The big cost of the program itself, which is estimated to be $2.5 billion, is going to be funded by the city. I don't think anybody has determined how. It's probably they're talking about a value capture bonds. But right now, what has been incurred by us is the cost of some outside consultants to do the preliminary studies. And that would be just part of our regular expense.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Michelle.
Real quickly, Kim, on the financial analysis in the MD&A, you mentioned an $11 million receivable pertaining to a property sale. Is that something where part of the sale agreement was that you would be financing it for some period of time? Because I'm not used to real estate closings happening without payment changing hands.
Right.
Well, this is actually an
Is that
interest in
cool?
a partnership that we had that actually, and the underlying asset was the property.
I see. Thank you.
On the future tenant receivables, I couldn't quite, I didn't figure it out, my fault probably, that the receivables are paying over a 19-year period, but they're carried on the balance sheet at some number, or are they? They are.
So that would be the straight lining?
You
No,
bring 'em
this-
in.
This was the issue I think Michelle raised last year, where we initially had it on the balance sheet, but then we netted the future receivables and to
Oh,
those
Michelle is shaking
off.
her head to his
Right.
explanation.
I'm just remembering the discussion.
Go ahead.
And the idea was that we didn't, because a receivable that's that far out is not sort of guaranteed to be received, so we're only showing the current portion of it.
I see.
Right. And we've
It's measurable, but it's not available.
Right,
Okay.
right.
But I was looking at whether if there was anything in the future you discounted present value, but if you don't put it on the books in the year in which it happens, then there's no discount.
Yeah, that's not the required accounting under the accounting standards, unfortunately.
The Brooklyn Army Terminal, you manage that for the city, is that it?
Yes.
One of the, so there's a lot of different businesses in there?
Yes.
I've never really,
Oh yeah, I think there's over 50 businesses. It's about 99% leased. We're now building out another building in a couple of
I see.
phases. It's mostly light manufacturing and a lot of jobs.
yeah, no, it's a good location for that, yeah.
Yeah.
And are you involved at all in the new seaport construction, or no?
Yep, we manage the seaport on behalf of the city, and we have been working with Howard Hughes.
Of course,
to-
they've taken down the building and
Yes.
putting up a new one. It's
Correct.
really, yeah, all right.
I have one final question. You have sort of intercompany transactions, what priced at $2 million and $1.5 million, where you get charged for your services. Is that arm's length pricing, or how is it arrived at?
You're talking about the IDA and the
Yeah,
build.
yeah.
Yes, that is, there is quite an extensive financial analysis that's done, determined how many hours, what type of staff, what type of fees, and we do get that analysis approved by our auditors to make sure that it is reasonable. Should we move on to IDA?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you one thing.
Oh, okay, I'm
So
sorry.
you prefer you offer your employees a defined contribution plan as opposed to a regular pension plan?
Yeah, we are not eligible to participate in NICERS.
Okay.
Our employees are not, so we give them the,
So you this, and it's working pretty well, I guess?
yep.
Okay. You want to go to IDA? I don't know.
We'll follow the agenda. I'm sorry.
I think you had,
The agenda says the next one would be the New York City Land Development Corporation.
the schedule of investments, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Purpose of
Well,
a separate report for a schedule of investments. This is purpose.
That's a PAAA.
That's a PAAA, Public Authorities Accountability Act requires the separate statement,
that's the second.
which is all
It's all-
integral to the financials.
And I should say that the reason that what we do is usually address that to the extent that we want to inform, the readers and yourselves that the investments that are made, which are outlined in that investment report, are within the investment guidelines that the EDC board has adopted. It's mostly government securities, and it's all government securities and money market. But that's the investment guidelines that have been established by the board, and this basically, portrays the compliance with
really-
those guidelines.
Basically, it's a carved out piece of the footnote.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is
okay.
exactly that.
Yeah.
But it's required to be
Yeah,
separate for
I
PAAA.
understand, so
It's there.
Oh, you wanted to go to IDA
Yeah,
now?
we'll go to IDA because
Okay.
it's
I'm fascinated by,
yeah, it's much more interesting than the others.
they're not an obligation of you, of the city, the stadium bonds, because of the revenue that's pledged to it, right?
Yep, it's just a pass-through.
A pass-through.
Okay, so now we're on the New York City Industrial Development Agency. Fred?
Right, and I guess, again, it starts with an auditor's opinion. The auditor's opinion was, again, unmodified or unqualified, so it's a clean opinion. There was no findings, and
No, it was clean.
it's clean.
Good.
So that's a good thing. And so the financial statements, again, are the MD&A, the financials and footnotes, and then the gas report that I mentioned in the EDA financials as well. In the case of the IDA, the net position has, in fact, decreased for this 1 year ending June 30th by an amount of $3 million. I should point out that on the statement of net position, which is page 10, there's a new line item, secured interest in assets, which reflects that secured interest we took in equipment for the Fresh Direct location in the Harlem River Yards. That's a new line item on the financials. So the, I guess, important thing to note here is that the IDA has a lot of, it looks like a very large $1.9 billion worth of assets and $1.7 billion worth of liabilities, but in fact 1.85 of the assets are the Stadia projects and 1.7 of the liabilities are the Stadia projects. So those two very large transactions kind of obfuscate the entire financials. The IDA portion itself is just the remainder of that.
But the pilot lease receivable is what's pledged to the, pretty much to the Stadia bonds, right?
Correct. Correct. Yes, we collect the,
And the
pilot
bonds
receivables.
payable are not necessarily an exact offset because you may have some of your own bonds, or I'm wrong.
We don't have any of our own bonds that
So
we're responsible
it would
for the
all
debt
be
service.
Stadia bonds.
There are other projects that have bonds,
thank you for the
but it's not,
clarification.
it's
Okay.
not our own bonds.
So the two cannot offset because of some other projects.
Right.
Okay.
The assets and the liabilities that are recorded for the Stadia
No, no,
projects
it's
are
sort of-
offsetting. And there is actually a schedule in the back that does break that out. So the
Just for,
Yeah.
how do you, foolish question maybe, how do we determine the pilot payments that the stadiums have to make?
the
Or
pilot
they've been determined in advance?
That's determined on the debt service.
In advance?
Yes.
right.
And it's not necessary to audit them, they seem to flow in, is that it?
Yep. I mean, if they go into default, if they
I'm
don't, if
sorry.
they miss a debt service payment or something like that, then obviously we would take action. But it's a preset debt service schedule, and they use that to pay bonds.
It's not your debt, so it flows in.
It's not our debt, right?
Okay.
Okay. So moving on to the statement of revenue, expenses, and changes in net position, which is on page 11. You'll notice that the income for the 2016 has dropped by $3 million, and this is the result of IDA not participating in any Liberty bond issuance by the ESDC. We had an agreement with them where we shared in half of the proceeds from those bond issuances. They didn't happen to do any in 2016, so that impacted the IDA revenue stream. Also, Build NYC has taken over the conduit debt issuance for the most part, so you don't see the same level of transactions occurring here.
On that statement, you show pilot lease income, pilot investment income, and then you show bond interest expense.
Correct. And if you were to...
And that pilot income is not your income, it belongs to the bonds.
Exactly. It goes to a trustee. We do monitor the
It just
trustee.
flows through to the trustee.
And the trustee makes the bond
And the
payments.
bond interest expense will include the stadium debt
Yes.
service, as well as some of your projects. Okay.
Yes. And in fact, those, if you added...
They may even,
the-
I do think, sorry.
That's
You're
okay,
right,
please.
they just net out.
They net out.
They net out,
Right.
okay.
Those three lines net out. So...
But you have to show it on the balance sheet, on the income statement.
Exactly. We have to
Okay.
show the transactions flowing through for reasons that our auditors would be happy to explain.
I'm sorry?
No, I say our auditors can tell you why,
Just threw them under the bus.
yes, why they require.
It's called transparency.
There's reasons for it.
Oh, maybe just to follow up on that quickly, there is a reason why you do not account for this as conduit debt in the same
Yes.
way that you do for your
Correct.
other. And that is because of their materiality or because of the terms of the agreement
It's the
itself?
terms of the agreement, the way that the transaction and the title responsibilities were described in the transaction.
So to try and translate that, conduit debt is a set of circumstances that allows an entity to effectively net out the impact of those transactions.
Okay.
This does not meet that criteria.
All right.
Thank you, yes.
So just to jump ahead, on page 15, where you identify your total conduit debt, this 1.7 isn't in there.
Right, you will, no, it's not. And you'll see on one of the other, I don't know, I believe we gave you a version of this, of the IDA notes. It has a really thick schedule on the back of it with details that you couldn't possibly read. That, again, is a PAAA requirement, and it lists all of the outstanding debt transactions. So, no, these aren't, to answer your questions, no, they're the ones that aren't on the book.
And then conduit debt dropped almost $1 billion.
Conduit debt was, these things are paid off because IDA isn't continuing to issue. As they drop off and they aren't replaced by new debt, then the number will continue to go down.
But you're basically saying the trustee sees to it that they pay the interest and the amortization.
Exactly.
And they make the payment to the bondholder.
I'm sorry, dear?
They make the payments to the bondholders
Yeah.
directly.
To the, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't look, do those bonds sell at par?
I don't remember. I could check. Originally?
They don't
Or
care.
now? I
It's
don't
not
know.
theirs.
No, it's not that, it's curious, that's all.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, so the only other maybe point I wanted to make was because the net change was essentially a loss of $3 million, that loss, for all intents and purposes, when you look at the puts and takes here, is the payments for the special projects that the IDA has taken on. So as they have accumulated monies, they've also authorized us to get involved with various special projects that have been deemed, appropriate for the IDA and at the city's behest. So in this case, you'll see a $3 million special project cost. That is essentially what it's being funded out of the net assets of the IDA. Okay. Then on page 12 and 13, this is again the cash flow. The cash flow from operations was minimal, only $300,000. There was a $9 million amount that was sort of cashed out of investments, which funded all of the other parts of the transaction. So the net change was an actual increase of $9 million, but it was essentially the effects of having cashed out investments as opposed to having generated from operations. Then I'll just skip to the governmental auditing standards section again to say that Ernst & Young again has attached, you'll see it attached on page 37. They've included their opinion, and they've had no findings on the internal controls of the IDA. So if there are any further questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Just point out something, you seem to like what you do so much that you say the same thing twice on page 9.
Page
I'll give it to you, don't
On
bother.
page 9?
Page 9, same sentence.
All right, that happens.
It happens. And there's something else, is Workforce One the name of it, or is that a typo?
Yep, no, that Workforce One is
That's
the,
really not a typo.
yes. All right, you'll have to point that out to us, page 9.
And the investments that you sold, that's other than these stadium bonds. You had investments, you sold them, you bought others.
Yeah, that's just for our own,
For your
the
own.
own balance,
Right.
our internal balance.
And then I know that there's a second statement here, which again, they have the investment statement, the same as the EDC. Same conclusion, the investments are listed there. We're in compliance with the board authorized investment policies. They're all government securities and money market funds.
And the pilot revenue is not for the stadium, it's for your other projects. The cash flow on page 12, you're showing
No.
pilot revenue of 118 million
Right, the pilot revenue, all the pilot revenues from here go to
for
fund.
other projects.
No, they go to fund the Stadia project.
No, that's not. That's correct. That pilot revenue, that's IDA pilot revenue that we turn over to the city at the end of each fiscal year.
If the stadium bonds were refinanceable, who would pull the trigger in trying to make that happen? You or somebody else?
Well, the issuer, the Yankees or the Mets would come to us to say they
Try
want to
to-
do a refunding, and we would do it through build,
And given
or we would do it through IDA. Yeah.
given the very low interest rates today, has anything been talked about?
There have been a couple meetings. I don't know what the status of it is. Yes, but you're right. They do carry the large interest rate.
That wouldn't affect you in any event because
Uh,
this wouldn't accrue to you.
We would get no benefit out of it. We would do the transaction for them and get a fee and carry it on our books in a different way, but they would reap the benefits of the savings in debt service, yes.
You have your hand on the trigger. Could you stop a refinancing?
Why?
Well, because you get paid for agreeing.
We would get a big fee for that. I don't have the hand on the trigger, but
Okay.
I'm sure there's been talks. I mean, the market's very favorable right now. Any other questions on IDA?
But IDA is still pretty active other than the stadium stuff.
They're active in giving benefits to new projects. They're not doing any tax exempt bond issues. Those are all been switched over to the build. But we do projects for other types of benefits that we give out. The pilot stuff, the mortgage recording tax relief, the sales tax benefits, and things like that. Packages for industrial small companies. But I would say the volume has slowed down.
Just one other minor thing. On your credit risk, you say that your policy is to limit investments to debt securities in the U.S. and
What page?
page 20. And yet, the last sentence of that paragraph refers to money market and mutual funds. So that isn't covered by your policy? Where it excludes reference, the policy is broader than the first sentence.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
The question is,
the money
the
market
first sentence
mutual
says
fund.
your policy limits you to certain securities. The last sentence says that you have money market mutual funds.
But they're government money market and mutual funds.
Oh, okay.
No, they're not.
So they have the same credit risk. It's just they're a mutual fund made of government and treasuries.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions to the committee on IDA? If not, what did you want to do next?
So I think we'll segue straight into Build NYC.
It is.
The build, okay. Build New York City Resource Corporation,
Yes.
okay.
Was there Eddie Cantor used to sing about Ida? Which comedian talked about Ida?
Okay, so Build NYC, as was the case with EDC and the IDA, received, again, an unmodified clean opinion from our auditors. There was no findings, and they've concluded that the financial statements fairly represent our position. Then there's the MTA and the financial statements, which begin on page 7.
Page 7?
Page 7, which is the balance sheet or the statement of net position. And the Build NYC Resource Corporation is primarily issuing conduit debt. And as a result of that, they're generating the fees associated with it. And you can see that this is actually for the third year in a row, the income generated from that has resulted in an increase in the assets of the corporation.
What is the purpose of they're going to be building, they're trying to build certain types of structures in the city, is that it?
I think they're trying to facilitate the ability to borrow money for entities to do those things.
So Build NYC was created when IDA lost the ability to fund not-for-profits throughout the city.
IDA used to do it, can't
Yes.
do it, so you need this.
So they couldn't do 501c3
Thank you for the
tax-exempt bonds, so
clarification.
now Build takes over all of those projects.
Okay.
And then as you go, so the assets of the corporation are currently at $11.5 million, with liabilities of only $100,000, leaving the net position at $11.4 million. The new section on this balance sheet is the non-current asset section, which is just basically a breakout of the investments that were greater than a year's worth of maturity. We've now represented those as non-current assets. Then on page 8, which is the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in that position, the equivalent of the income statement, you'll see an increase in revenue, actually the bottom line, the increase in the net position has changed up by $3 million. The revenues of $5.3 million for the year is the result of 28 conduit debt transactions totaling $2.6 billion. The operating expenses increased by $500,000 for the period, and this is a shift in the management fee that you were asking about earlier. And the management fee that's charged to both IDA and Build has been shifting from IDA to Build, commensurate with the increase in activity level of Build and the decrease of IDA's issuance of conduit debt. So the amount's the same, it's just shared in a different proportion between these two entities. So that line item is increased by $500,000 for the year. Then the special projects are relatively minor for Build, leaving it with an $11.4 million net position. The statement of cash flows, which is on the next page, again, in this case, the cash generated from operations is in fact $3.2 million. This is almost on a cash basis because the amount of transactions get processed through it. There's an increase in the investments of $3.9 million, so although cash decreased by 0.8 overall, it's basically a shift between the cash and the investments. And then the investment schedule, which is the second statement you have for Build New York, same conclusion. They're 88% invested in government securities and 12% invested in money market mutual funds. So they are, again, within the guidelines of the board's adoption of their investment policies. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
They have no employees, right? You people provide the services for them.
Yes.
That's correct.
In this case, the conduit debt went up $800 million, roughly, on page 10.
On page 10, the conduit debt, what's at 2 points?
They did go.
Yeah.
1.8 to 2.6.
Yeah, it's the fourth
Right.
sentence.
Yeah.
On
Is there
page.
a listing for what projects or entities you lent the monies to in both cases?
Yes.
Yes, but just to be clear, we haven't lent them money, they just
No,
issued bonds through us.
You
Right.
worked on getting financing.
They issue their bonds through us. We're the issuer on their behalf. They're responsible for the debt, but we do have a schedule of all the different bond issues that have gone through Build.
Would you be able to provide that to the?
Sure. Is it in the?
It's
back?
actually on the website. We publish it for
we could
the
definitely do that.
city. The public law, I can't remember the public law, but we actually do prepare schedules of all the debt.
Yep.
And there's a
We
new.
can get that to you.
Yeah, the new GASB that shows up in the CAFR this year has got information about it in the city's CAFR as well. But we have detailed schedules that list in excruciating detail.
The paperwork makes, I assume, plain that if the thing for which you're acting conduit defaults, you have no responsibility.
No responsibility.
They have no liability.
No.
No.
No, none whatsoever.
That's really the definition of conduit debt.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have no.
The governance structure of these entities, is it basically the same members in the board?
Yes, it's the same board.
So it's the same board, but they're legally separate entities
Correct.
with the same members?
Yes.
Well, to clarify, the IDA and Build boards are.
Yes. Not EDC.
Right,
Right,
it's separate
sorry.
from EDC.
But, so it was basically the same government structure that was split because of the non-profit restriction on financing?
Correct.
That's correct.
Same question I asked before. Why is some of your bank balance not collateralized? It's not a lot compared to other things. And this one you say was not collateralized.
Same
Same
response.
reason.
Yeah, same response. It's our general counsel's interpretation that, and again, we are in the alternative investing in
Figures he has it done.
money market, governmental money market funds.
No, but I'm only looking at bank balances.
Right. So every night, the bank balances is
Gets
swept.
swept.
Right. That's how we protect
Alright.
ourselves.
Do each one of these entities have their own separate audit committees?
Yes.
Are they the same members?
Yes.
Again, for the IDA and Build,
For IDA and Ville,
entities,
yes.
they are the same.
You say if IDA didn't lose the ability to do this financing, you wouldn't have needed Build New York.
Yes.
It was in lieu of that. Any other questions of the members of the committee? Go ahead.
Okay, now we'll get into the really interesting ones. I have the Land Development Corporation.
Okay. The Land Development Corporation,
These are real numbers.
they are real numbers.
This is the one that's.
You want to keep
that
these
hardly
as separate
exists.
legal entities? There's no way of combining them?
The land development was just recently created due to a change
So
in
you're
the
not sure
structure of the
yet?
EDC, so we have to keep this separate, yes. And then there are legal and accounting
There's a neighborhood
reasons why
capital.
we need separate.
Heck, the county fee is more than the net worth.
Right, there isn't any real great, I mean, the Land Development Corporation was just basically created to facilitate the transfer of properties between the city and EDC. And it is only when a property does transfer that a transaction is recorded, and it's recorded at $1. So we don't have a, the transaction recorded in FY16. The amount that's comes into the corporation as assets or as revenues is there by virtue of a grant from EDC to pay for whatever operating costs there are in that entity for the year, which is essentially the audit fee associated with these financials. So they're really the net position is $4,999. It has remained that for the last several years, and there is this year very little to no activity in this aside from the audit requirements.
I can understand why you didn't round anything. It would disappear if you rounded.
These are not rounded, right?
Yes, in this case there isn't a. It did receive a clean
But
opinion
this
from
is
our
not in
auditors.
thousands, this is full dollars.
That's actual dollars.
That's a
right.
small entity, okay.
It's a small.
It's a small entity, but we have full financial statements, we have an audit committee, we went through all of this
Who
just for
said
this
something?
as
It's
well.
a small country, but there are those who love it. I can't remember who said that.
That's right. So there's not a lot to.
Yeah.
No, there's
activity here.
nothing really here.
Well, the other thing is you miss some places the capitalizing the V in the city of New York.
Okay, we'll check that.
I'll give the whole collection to you.
Okay.
Okay, so then finally we'll move on to the New York City Neighborhood Capital Corporation.
The New York City Neighborhood Capital Corporation was created specifically to apply to the
That's a
federal
different-
New Market Tax
You got
Credit Program.
Bellow, yeah. We used to have them.
I beg your pardon?
I forget. No, I'm just saying, I remember this firm, we
Right.
had them do something else. Michelle, you would remember, I think. Bellow did,
They do the audits of the tax lien trusts.
okay.
And they audited these financials and
Okay.
again issued a clean, unmodified opinion. Again, there was very little to no activity
Yeah,
in this
just
entity.
started a short time ago.
It did, but however, I will tell you that they were successful this year in being awarded $55 million worth of new market tax credits from the federal government. So that program in FY17 will kick off, and it's a fairly complicated structure of the way that money has to be deployed. But it's a big win for the organization that this corporation that was structured to facilitate our application to that process ended in a successful award this year in 17. But in 16, again, there was very little activity. The original grant that was awarded to them
It
from
just recently
EDC
started, yeah.
is all that was, whatever wasn't paid down from the original 125 is what remains. There was no income for it, and the expenses are just the audit fee for the period.
So we created this entity for the purpose of getting new market tax credit allocations, and we had put in applications, and 2 years we'd got nothing. This year, for the first time, we got 55 million. So next year at this time, these financials will be much more interesting.
Okay. Do we have any more questions for the representatives of New York City, DC?
Great.
If
Thank you
not,
very
thank you
much.
very much for
Happy
all
holidays.
everything.
Thank you.
I'll take your comments, yes.
You got a proofread here.
Gotta make sure we fix the typos.
Have a good holiday.
Thank you.
All the best.
Take care, everyone.
Mr. Nelson still with the firm?
He is retired in South Carolina, down outside of
places.
Charleston.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cheaper to live there, I guess.
Warmer weather.
What?
He didn't want to have to deal with the snow.
You
We
can
don't
never
get that.
tell.
Originally from New York? A
New
York
Jersey.
boy to
He
go
was
down
from
to
New Jersey. He was originally from like Teaneck area.
Charleston.
No, you usually go to Florida to avoid the estate tax, but accountants don't get that rich.
Oh, he's the auditor from Bellow. That's the one. I recognize him, the Asian man, yeah.
Oh, I should get it.
Kim,
Thanks, how are you?
give regards. Well, we have the libraries.
I'm trying to avoid knee surgery, and so getting up and down is problematic.
Which
Mr. Chairman.
library is this?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, I'd just like to say a word or two before the representatives speak.
I'm sorry?
If I might, I would just like to say a word or two before the representatives of the Brooklyn Public Library speak.
Sure. Do you want them to introduce themselves, or?
Sure.
Go ahead, why don't you, and then she'll.
Goodbye.
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm Brett Robinson. I'm the Executive Vice President for Finance and Administration at Brooklyn Public Library. I'm joined here by Amadou Waji. He's our Vice President of Finance. Miriam Katowitz is our Vice Chair and also the Chair of our Audit Committee. James Connors at the end, and L.D. Wilson are here from Eisner Amper. They're our auditors.
Go ahead, Michelle.
I just wanted to start by introducing the Brooklyn Public Library was a new component unit for the city for the first time in 2016.
Thanks, Mike.
And that is because of the amount of control that the city exercises over their board. So they're sort of new to this process, and I want to welcome them and thank them. It's been a real pleasure working with them through the first year, and it's really been an easy transition, so I'm happy about that. Thanks.
You never put, Michelle, they were never shown in the company?
No, until this year, none of the public libraries were shown.
Okay.
And Bernie, just as a refresher, about
No,
2 years ago, the Public Advocates Office had asked that the libraries be put before us, and that, I think, was during some issues with the Queens Library, but as a result of the determination of it being a component unit, it falls squarely within the purview of this board independently to review, and we really do welcome them coming before us today.
If I could just interject really quickly, I believe prior to this year when they were reported as component units, they were reported as agencies, were they not?
No, they've never been reported before in the city's CAFR. There has been the activity on the city side of making the contributions, which is shown as a city expenditure.
Okay.
And there has been capital grants that are also city capital expenditures. And some of their assets, I believe, belong to the city and are reported as city assets.
Okay.
In the city's chart of account, there are agency numbers assigned to them.
Right.
But that's only for the grant purposes.
How
Okay.
long have you had Eisner Amper as your auditors?
This is the 10th year.
Pardon me?
This is the 10th year.
How?
10.
10 years. Oh, it's a very nice report, that's why got it.
Color scheme's good.
They seem to, no, they know you people, I think.
Yeah.
By that, I mean it was
So-
professional
Oh,
and
great.
well done.
While we're talking about the report, I have one request, and that is next year, please unlock it so I can write notes on it. Thank you.
Okay. Great.
I would say they did this by the book.
Okay, so just a little bit about us. This is our first time before this committee. We're happy to be here. As an institution, we were incorporated back in 1902. We have been operating libraries on behalf of the city of, well, at that time, city of Brooklyn, now the borough of Brooklyn, going back to an operating agreement with the city in 1903. We're currently the 5th largest library system in the United States. We have an operating budget slightly over $117 million this fiscal year that supports 1,100 full-time employees, about 250 part-time employees. We have 4 billion materials. That's it's mostly books, but periodicals, a few other odds and ends, and at this point over 100,000 digital books that you can borrow straight from your tablet or your phone if you'd like. We have 1,600 public-facing computers. The system consists of 60 libraries and 5 learning centers. We occupy about 1.1 million square feet of real estate. Most of those are city-owned buildings. A few of them are leased from private landlords. And thanks to a generous contribution from the City of New York, we are now open 6 days a week in all of our branches throughout Brooklyn. The city is our primary funder. About 85% of our operating budget, roughly 100 million of that 117 comes from the City of New York. An interesting feature, so we are a private 501c3, and we prepare our financial statements on a FASB basis, as opposed to many of the groups before you today, which are on a GASB basis. In terms of what we produce in a year, we had 8.7 million individual visits to our branches in the last fiscal year. You may have seen some pieces in the news. If you collectively sum up Queens, Brooklyn, and New York public libraries, we have more visits a year than all of the cultural and sports institutions in the city. So we do a lot of traffic. 14.9 million circulations, so anytime you borrow something from us, that's a circulation. So roughly 15 million of those transactions happened last year. We had more than 2.1 million computer sessions and 500,000 sessions through our Wi-Fi. We are the biggest provider of broadband services in Brooklyn. And a fact I'm particularly fond of, we have 2,000 volunteers who provide a number of different services on our behalf, 85,000 hours worth of service altogether. And we ran about 65,000 programs last year. Nearly 1 million people attended those programs. So that's just a little background on us since we're new. In terms of financial statements, so you have them in front of you. We were issued an unmodified opinion, a clean opinion. And just in terms of some highlights of that, so page 2 of the financial statements covers our financial position. We have roughly $107 million in assets. That is up slightly over last year, largely owing to investments in property. Liabilities slightly up. Altogether, net assets up at roughly 82 million. In terms of our activities, operating revenue again up. It's roughly $162 million altogether. The bump is largely due to the city's investment in 6-day service. So you'll see a corresponding expense bump as well, largely the salaries of the individuals that we hired to perform those services. I think those are the main highlights we wanted to point out to you, and we're interested in any questions you may have.
You have any questions? Go ahead.
Have a second.
And if you have no questions, that's good too.
Just as an amusing aside, I read your footnote 1, and it reads, serves more than 2,500 Brooklynites, till I realized I had to add three zeros to it.
Exactly, 2.5 million residents of Brooklyn, yes.
Because I'm used to that for dollars, but not for other numbers. And it
Threw you a bit.
it was an amusing thing.
I think there are more than 2,500 individuals on my block. So yeah.
They've been the building.
Is your cash, how much of your cash is coming by FDIC, and is the balance collateralized?
So,
I don't see anything in the footnotes for it.
yeah. Cash and cash equivalents, some of that is incorporated in our long-term investment. In terms of the cash we just hold on hand, it's not really collateralized. I'm going to speak more specifically.
FDIC insured. We used to sweep the balances. We had a Puerto Rico sweep that we used to do before the 2008 financial crash, but because of the exposure, we chose not to do it. So what we do is keep our cash and cash equivalent balances in CDs and money market accounts. We believe they're more safer, more secure than any other option that we might have currently.
How come it's not disclosed in the footnotes?
The same, excuse me, the same footnote disclosures are not required by FASB as they are by GASB, but you could consider adding those.
We could, yeah. Okay.
What is the nature of the funding you get from the city? What is it tied to, for want of a better term?
In other words, what prompts the $100 million? It's largely tied to the kinds of services we guarantee. So first and foremost, that we're going to operate. I'm sorry?
But it's unrestricted. It's not capital, or it's all expense money?
The $100 million is operating money. We do receive capital funds from the city as well, managed by the city's.
But the $108 million on page 3, that's all expense money?
Correct.
Is there actually a written contract between you and the city with regard to level of services to be provided for the grants?
I don't think so.
In 1903, we signed an operating agreement.
And it's been working perfectly ever since.
There are things that are called out in that operating agreement. The city would fund us up to 7-day service, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. There are other things in that operating agreement that swing the other way, and so I think we've all sort of.
You don't want to rock the boat.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Excuse me, if I might. Does the library run a separate foundation, or is it incorporated within the?
We do not. A few years ago, we merged our foundation board with our operating board. So we have a single board that governs both aspects.
So I represent Public Advocate Tish James, who would be angry at me if I didn't ask more questions about the Brooklyn Library, which is near and dear to her heart. In terms of the Brooklyn Heights sales that are going forward, obviously that's a city decision. Where's the library at in terms of its replacement, and what is the status to the latest, just so the board is understands that there's obviously been some changes at the library in the physical locations, and if you could.
And I'm sorry, I missed the very first part of your question. Can you just repeat it?
Just in terms of the Brooklyn Heights sale and
Brooklyn Heights
sales of some of the libraries for development, and how the library is going about replacing some of those services.
Sure. So Brooklyn Heights, just a context for the committee members who may not be as familiar with it. We have a library today at 280 Cabinet Plaza in Brooklyn Heights. It's a structure that goes back to 1960. It's not the greatest expression of what we want our buildings to be and do for our patrons today, but it sits on a very attractive piece of real estate. One of our challenges has been the state of our building infrastructure, and so we looked to basically monetize the value of that land in a way that would get us out from under roughly $9 million worth of investment we felt we needed to make in that branch, just to bring it to even keel. Not a great library, but one where it didn't leak and the air conditioning system worked in the summer. So we entered into an agreement with the city and with the Economic Development Corporation as our agent. Sold the development rights to that piece of property. It's worth $52 million, which more than covers the cost of replacing the branch. We will have a library in the base of a 36-story residential building. It also allows us to pull out roughly $40 million to invest in other libraries throughout the borough. So this was our effort to try and inject some funding into our capital program. It's going to allow us to create what we feel is going to be a transformative branch for the residents of Brooklyn Heights. And the deal we were able to structure with the with the developer also included at their cost the renting and the outfitting of an interim library in Brooklyn Heights so that there would not be an interruption in service through that time. Is there any other?
The only other question I had is unrelated. I was unaware of your agreement, the collaborative agreement on book ops. I just thought I'd ask, you know,
Sure.
if you could describe that and how you are allocating the costs.
The costs.
Yeah.
So we entered into an agreement a few years ago, as everybody was struggling with their operating budget, with the New York Public Library, to essentially merge our logistics operation. So the two systems now have a unified book acquisition department. The same book selectors that select books for New York Public also select books for Brooklyn Public, and actually it was our chief selection person that is managing that function, so I should probably have reversed that. The Brooklyn selection people are selecting books for New York Public Library, and we have the same fleet of trucks that distribute books. Like you put a hold on a book in one of our branches, and it exists in another branch. That book travels to Long Island City, much the same way that FedEx operation would happen, and then travels in a truck down to the branch where you have requested it. We saved about $2 million a year in operating costs with that merger, and we think it's running very well. In terms of how we allocate the costs, we actually there is a sort of regimented procedure for that. It has its own set of auditors, and it's largely based on workload. I think at the moment it's 62% of the costs is borne by New York Public Library, and the balance is borne by us.
That leads me to another question. Why isn't that combination system-wide?
It's a great question. Us and New York Public found it advantageous. At the time, Queens elected not to join in that partnership, and I can't speak for them on why they made that decision. Certainly, you know, the door is always open.
You know, it's presumably an overarching city interest in reducing overhead costs. Why doesn't the city, which controls all three libraries, I presume, say this is going to happen?
So Queens will be next, and just a disclosure I was going to do before I sit on the Queens Library for the Public Advocate. That'll be
Fix it.
I'm sure that'll be raised, but the Queens representatives will be next, and we can ask them that.
I think the real issue is that this should be moot, because shortly technology costs will be such that people could just borrow a tablet and they could electronically download, and we wouldn't have to move physical books all across the city.
We'll figure out some drone thing.
Well, I was just going to ask a question. Like, you mentioned that there were a lot of digital circulations.
Yep.
And you know, how many of the 15 million are digital? And how is that growing?
Yeah,
and how do
still
you
like a
expect
book.
that to impact, you know, operating costs going forward?
Yeah. So it is still a small proportion. I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but it is a rapidly growing. And so that's partly a function of us investing more in digital materials over the years. You know, I think we were at something like $50,000 to $100,000 a couple of years ago. We now invest nearly $1 million a year.
Do you know
in
what
digital
percentage
materials.
of your total circulation is available digitally?
It's roughly 100,000 digital books that we hold, as compared to 4 million physical materials. So, you know, there's some catch-up work to do there, but, you know, we do see it as a growing part of people's interests. And so we want to be able, the physical book is not going away anytime soon, but we want to be able to meet people where they are. And if they're interested in borrowing things digitally, that we have that material available for them. If they're interested in borrowing things physically, we have the comparable material for them. I expect that as a proportion over time, more of our collection budget will be spent on digital, and it will become an increasing proportion of the borrows. But I think, you know, people are still learning that they can do this. They can sit in their house and log into the library and borrow a book the same way they would buy it from Amazon, except it's free.
The small bookstore owner would question your thought that the book isn't going away anytime soon. But maybe, yeah. Well, they I don't know what their ratio of hardcover versus electronic their sales are. That's for sure. Anyway,
Small bookstores don't generally sell digital, right? They're
I
more.
know, that's
yeah.
my point.
Yeah.
I like
I said the physical book isn't going up anytime soon. How people distribute them, I'll let the free market sort that out.
So up for debate is all I'm saying.
Could I,
About how many branches are there, sir, other than the main? Go ahead. About how many branches are there? How many
branches? There are 60 branches. I'm sorry, there are 59 buildings throughout Brooklyn, 60 libraries altogether.
that are live?
Correct.
And of those, you say most of them are owned by the city, or?
Correct. We have
leased to the
5
library
remaining
for about
leased.
$1 or something?
5
I'm
leased.
sorry?
5 leased branches, and the balance are owned by the city of New York.
By
The city of New York.
City of New York. So the city provides capital funding for those buildings if they have to be repaired?
Correct, and we're sort of in a constant discussion as to the level of capital funding, but yes, the city does provide capital funding.
Not quite as adequate as we thought.
I'm sorry, Dick?
Not quite as adequate as we thought.
I'm sure.
They're all very old, these buildings.
Those things.
if I may,
Go ahead,
two
sir.
additional questions. One is, I noticed that you have an MOU with the EDC, which we just heard from, and Cultural Affairs, page 21, for a joint multi-tenant cultural programming space. First, if you could explain a little about that, but also, who's paying for what and how. But if you could explain how the library allocates certain of its physical space for use of community groups, not-for-profits. There's a lot of groups out there, for-profit entities that are using space. Is there a revenue-generating program? How is that decided, and who's making the decisions as to who pays and how much?
Yeah. I guess the vast bulk of us providing space for other organizations to operate out of is no charge, right? It's a community group or a community board sometimes, local not-for-profits that are using the library as a meeting space, and we enjoy being a nexus point of civic engagement. There are groups that rent space from us. That mostly happens in our central library, where we have an auditorium, say, that a group is looking to hold an awards ceremony, for example. And we'll work out an arrangement as to a fee for that. It is largely governed through a standard set of fees, but we work with people. If it's an organization that doesn't have a lot of resources, we'll discount that fee accordingly. We have encouraged more movie shoots in our libraries. We don't discount those at all. And that is becoming an interesting source of revenue for us. We always try to diversify where we can. Is that,
yeah, that's exactly it. And my last question is, I know other libraries have to deal with funding of their locations and construction, and a lot of them is heavily reliant upon individual member items of the city council, of the state, and specific allocations to specific projects. Does the library hold monies until, at what point do they go ahead with construction, as opposed to pooling the money of all the money that's received by these entities and going ahead with necessary projects, or is monies held for long periods of time until there's a sufficient level at which construction can begin?
I think there's two answers to that question. The first is, we, by and large, have not had the luxury of waiting to do comprehensive building improvements. So, when we get the funding to do the boiler repair, we do the boiler repair. We don't wait until we also have the money to do the roof and the HVAC and the facade and an interior renovation, because most of the time when we're repairing something, it's because it stopped working. We're not at the, we don't have yet the capacity to take care of systems that are beyond their state of good repair, but before they have ceased to function. Much of our work is actually replacing systems that have stopped working. That would be an ideal way to go, right? If you can take care of the full building's system needs at one time, the churn that comes from demobilizing, remobilizing, it would cost you less, it would take less time, but we don't generally have that luxury. In terms of the individual system work, there is a point before which most of our projects are managed by the city's Department of Design and Construction, They don't want to begin the work until you have a sufficient level of funding, right? So basically, you have to demonstrate you can build the thing before they're going to spend their resources designing it, which makes sense. You know, if they have lots of other things that those internal resources could be deployed to. So I think the answer to your question is we wait long enough to have the funding to initiate an individual system with the city and their Department of Design and Construction, but we don't wait until we have comprehensive funding to take care of everything in the building, because that lead time is generally a long one.
All right, thank you.
Other questions?
Do we have any more questions of the representatives from Brooklyn? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to give you some.
What's that? I'm sorry?
He has some typos.
Oh, some typos. Excellent. Happy. And you know, if any of you are residents of Brooklyn and you don't have a library card, please do let me know afterwards, and we'll see if we can take care of that.
We did have the auditors put out a management letter, nothing serious. Did anybody have any comments on that? Any members of the committee? They really, you took care of all of them from last year, and
correct.
I don't see anything.
Brett, quick question, just based on what you just stated. My understanding is you do not need to be a Brooklyn resident and maybe not even a city resident
That is
to
correct.
get a library.
And if you're willing to pay the $50, you don't even have to be a New York State resident. There is a fee if you're out of state, but any resident of the state of Brooklyn is entitled to hold a library card at any library.
Out of New York.
Sorry, state of. There's just the one. That's how important we are.
Yeah.
Our own state constitution now.
Many
the
agree
state
with
of
you.
New York, correct.
While we were talking about the management letter, I noticed that password interval is 180 days. That's way off. I mean, we at our firm are 90, and we've been told it's not fast enough there. So I think 180 is beyond what good practice is.
Yeah, and we're
It doesn't
working
take
this
much
year
to fix that up.
to bring it down to 90.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're accepting that recommendation, and we will be making that adjustment. I think every time they come back, they have the time again. So next year it'll be 45 days. The year after that it'll be 20.
Wait till you get where you have to have something with all kind of artificial symbols to get in.
Yeah, exactly.
That's when you need a token.
Right.
Yes.
Or retina scan, something. Something.
Thank you again.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Michelle, will New York have a?
No, the New York Public Library System is not, the city does not have adequate control over the
So they're not
board.
considered
They
a-
are not a
okay,
component unit of
okay,
the city.
On their board, though,
Yes, the city has
the
enough,
majority.
enough representation
same
on the
with
board
Queens
to,
now, yeah.
and the same with Queens.
Queens, it was not until recently, right, sir?
Okay, thank you.
Queens,
Queens and Brooklyn were added at the same time.
Yeah.
But I
In
say
terms
at
of
one
the
time,
structure.
Queens didn't have, the Queens board,
Oh, in terms of it's the same board structure, the mayor and the borough president appointing to the board with the ex officios being by
Okay.
statute. It's a much smaller board than Brooklyn and
Much.
Manhattan. Manhattan's a very large board.
okay.
Queens is the one that had the problems, right? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Ugly. Yeah. You went with the DA was.
He seemed very,
They
very
followed up.
knowledgeable, this guy, and I like the audit report. The one from Queens was really
I saw that.
I don't know what they did that for. That wasn't necessary.
Legal fees and indemnification.
I don't want to have that conversation. I get what they do.
I think he did it, well. I read about it, yeah. I read everything the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have. And every once in a while, I go to this place I belong to, which has when I wait for a guest, they have the only time I read the New York Post is there. Then I get a blast of Rupert Murdoch's gossip. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, again, I want to thank the representatives of
Open the
Queensborough
auditor's, I
Public
see.
Library for their cooperation and assistance during the transition to their being included in the city's CAFR. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Johanna Richmond. I am the new Chief Financial Officer of the Queens Public Library. I've only been at the library a couple of weeks, so
So you want to...
unfortunately, I don't have a background yet to do most of the talking that some of the other presenters did, but I will rely on Tosky and Company to basically fill in the information that I don't have. So I'm going to turn it over.
My name's Robert Zielinski. I am from Tosky and Company, the director who's been in charge of the audit. We've been auditing the library for the last 3 years. This was our 3rd year, but obviously the first year we're presenting to you. My colleague Joe Kem.
Yeah, hi, I'm Joe Kem. I was the partner on the engagement this year. My first time I rotated on the engagement.
Are you also from the audit company?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll be happy to help Johanna ask any historical questions that we can. Mostly financial, some of the operational questions. If we know the answer, we'll let you know. If we don't know the answer, we'd have to get back to you.
I was curious why you had to issue a supplemental report. Did you audit, you have your statements, they've been audited, I think the opinion is clean.
Yes.
Why did you have to issue a supplemental?
The supplemental report basically provides the detail of...
Just some more detail.
Of everything that, because what we have, top-level financial statements are consolidated totals, and what the consolidated...
Okay.
is basically provide the information related to that.
And it's at the request of the board to issue that.
I tell you, as somebody with nearsighted eyes, this was awful small type. And I don't know if they ever do about it, but it makes it very difficult to...
Well, it's a really significant spreadsheet.
That's what it is, yeah.
Puts everything together. From our standpoint as auditors, as Robert indicated, we've done this now for 3 years. We did issue an unmodified or an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. In addition, we did the audit in accordance with government auditing standards, and so the report on internal control of the financial reporting and compliance with laws and regulations are in no control matters, no findings related from that standpoint. And then because the library is also a recipient of federal dollars, we also did uniform guidance symbol related to that. And again, from that standpoint, there were no findings related to it. No modified opinion on compliance with the federal programs, and then there were no findings related to that. These financial statements are done on a FASB basis, on a GASB basis.
But you issued an opinion on the supplemental information as well as on the, okay, it's just extra work, I think, okay.
Yeah, both pieces. And again, unlike what I heard from Brooklyn, there is a foundation, and that is the affiliate.
I'm sorry?
There is an actual foundation.
You have a foundation?
So it's Queensborough Library and affiliate is the foundation.
And the position and the results of the foundation's financial year are included in the consolidated financial statements with any eliminating entries, transactions between the two eliminated appropriately.
Yeah, but you have some language in your footnote 1 that says, reflects the fact that a significant reduction in level of support provided by the city, if this were required, may have an effect. Why did you find it necessary to make that statement? I don't think Brooklyn had it in it. Why? And I haven't seen that in a lot of other.
Yeah, I think that's a historical comment that the library is always included in there. If you look at the revenue sources, obviously the city is by far the biggest single funding source that the library has. And if that were to change, then obviously that could have negative impact on the library's ability to
turn to those of you who are more adept at this, Michelle particularly, is that the sort of thing, I don't remember seeing that for any of the other similar situated groups.
No, I think it's special to you.
I mean, it seems to me that unless there's some reason that you want to single yourself out from everybody else that deals with the city, you may want to think about that footnote.
I think that is a historical comment that's been in it, again, related to the funds.
And then you start off by saying it's a body politic. I haven't seen that language as a lawyer in years. You're either a corporation or you're not. I mean, some of this is antiquated.
Yep.
And you might want to come into the 21st century with the language.
Sure.
The contributions from New York State are different than the grants. It's, what is it, an unlimited contribution or with page 5, sir, in your
They're
statements.
listed under support as State of New York, and then 2 items down as contributions from New York State. Curious what the 2 separate items represent.
Well, the separate items represent amounts that come directly from the state and then amounts that come through the city that are budgeted amounts that come through the city as support for the organization. So the grants and contracts with the city of New York are the ones that come from the city, and then there are separate contracts that come directly from the state.
And then the contributions from the state are still separate? You have like 5.6 million in unrestricted from the state.
Right. Oh, contributions. That, yeah, I don't know what that particular contribution was for.
It's just, I don't know, we're categorizing state revenues differently. I will have to.
You don't know what
give
it
you a line
was.
item, 'cause I don't know that. And unfortunately, Tracy is collaborating.
The city income, you have 13 million designated as temporarily restricted and the 97 as unrestricted. Does that have to do with unspent grant money, or what was the restriction?
Yes, I believe that is for unspent grant money. It is, restrictions on resources. Well, yes, in the footnote, we break it out by by purpose, but that is the amount. There's also a receivable, or a receivable for some of the grant money, I believe, that accounts for the temporarily restricted.
Thank you.
The footnote on investments is much skinnier than I'm accustomed to seeing with the 3 levels normally talked about. And I don't know, you do have, what, $25 million in investment, some number like that? So is that big enough to have that standard disclosure about how you value the quarter level 1, level 2, level 3? I don't see that here.
I don't see it.
I'm looking at page 9, which has the cash and cash, investments rather. Oh, it's in the back. Page 8, sorry, your Mike is right, you did pick it up, I picked it up later, okay, I forgot.
Yes, page 18,
Here it is.
sorry.
Yeah,
The fair value is left out.
yeah, it's done there. There's one other comment I have about this one.
Once again, the cash, in the sense of how much is FDIC or uncollateralized or collateralized?
There is a footnote that talks about basically credit risk and collateral risk, and
I think that's note 2.
On page 12.
Thank you for picking up my socks.
So it does show the concentration of risk related to the cash balances.
Well, you've got something here too that says that certain investments in marketable securities and broker deals are insured up to $500,000 by SIPC. The securities are not insured there, that's insuring the financial stability of the broker-dealer, not the individual securities. So it's not right.
That's right. That'll be a correction to be made.
Okay.
Michelle,
Yes.
in the statement that the auditors handed out, they're using a FASB presentation,
Yes.
and the same was true in Brooklyn,
Yes.
and you're permitting that.
Yes, it is permissible under GASB rules to.
I'm sorry, dear?
It is permitted under the GASB rules to include component units that report on other than a governmental basis.
Okay, okay.
Now, if I can come back to this footnote 2 again, it says that you haven't experienced any losses in these accounts. If these are security accounts maintained at a broker-dealer, the biggest risk is not that the broker-dealer goes broke, but the investments go bad. And in the decline in the market, you'd have been be very unusual not to have been hit when the market cracked. So anytime you have marketable securities, you have a market risk.
Yep.
And I don't think that's discussed here. It seems to
That's another note that will be corrected.
okay. And if I can keep going, Bernie, on note 3, on
Go ahead.
page 14, there's an enormous amount of discussion about permanently restricted net assets and all this sort of stuff. It seems like a lot of more being said here about these things than I've seen in other similar situations in the city. I don't really care, but I just point out that you've said more than most others.
I think that disclosure is really related to the foundation.
Oh, okay.
And some of the required disclosures related to, NIFA, et cetera.
I got it.
Yeah, I'm familiar with those rules. I don't believe you have to report each individual restricted grant or endowment.
I think it's, so it's more detailed. Well,
That might be something you might consider for your supplementary report.
yeah. I'm curious, this is a picayune thing. Mr. and Mrs. Ahmed, is that the last name, first name, or no middle initial, something like that?
Yeah, I believe that to be a last name. That was, the
Okay.
name of the endowment
The
as
endowment,
it's been
I just
inherited by
curious.
all of us.
Okay. Boy, you do have an aggressive position in your portfolio with all the derivatives. But that's up to you.
How many branches are there, ma'am? Would you have that information?
My understanding is 63.
I'm sorry?
63,
63.
yes.
And they're all city-owned buildings? I mean, or some of your own, or you're not sure?
I believe there might be several buildings
That
that
you're
are
leasing.
not city-owned, but I could not state for
Yeah,
certain.
I understand.
Bernie, my recollection is that the original Carnegie locations that are there are the city-owned ones, and that there are additions that are leased
They're
by the
additional.
libraries.
Yeah.
Right, but the city has a large number that they're responsible for.
Yeah, no, for the most, it's the city, yeah.
On page 17 shows the listing of capital assets in our building and building improvements. There's at cost 39,000. 39 million. That's before the depreciation of library-owned buildings. But I can't off the top of my head identify exactly which ones are library-owned.
I tell you, it's one other thing that I always go to war with the accountants on, and that is the last sentence of your report on the supplementary information that's for the Board of Trustees and management. Here, we are neither the Board of Trustees nor management. We're looking at it. And I think we persuaded almost every other accounting firm to drop that paragraph.
Something we can consider. Sure.
Otherwise, we shouldn't be looking at it.
Although I believe the assumption is that management can distribute it to whoever they feel necessary, that we're distributing it to management and the board. So,
All right.
but yeah, it's a change we can consider.
Given the circumstances that are public about the goings-on, did you do extra work in connection with this audit?
Well, there was before we were retained as the auditors, the city and state came in and they were doing their own audit, and there was a consultant that was retained by the library to do a process audit, a fraud audit, and to give recommendations of procedures that they might think would be helpful. So once we were retained, we did use that stuff as part of our risk assessment. We were not retained to do specific fraud auditing, just financial auditing. However, with relation to anything that had happened, we used that as part of our risk analysis when we were doing our audit, which included seeing the reports that came from the consultants and the outside auditors with their recommendations to see if those recommendations have been implemented, speaking with general counsel, speaking with the former CFO and purchasing manager and everybody involved, and use that to determine our risk of the engagement, and then which was used to determine the nature, timing, and extent of our audit for the financial audit. So to that extent, we did design certain procedures where we thought that there might be a material misstatement in the financial statements. However, the specific fraud auditing or consulting for process and procedures was done by other consultants.
Joe, if you, sorry, I just got a note that you needed to turn your mic on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Uh-oh. You know, my pearls of wisdom made it into the...
So this is your third year of the engagement?
Yes.
You started with fiscal 14, 15, and now you're doing 16?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Actually, I know you're new, but just
What was that, Michelle?
I understand that the vice president, what was your title again, ma'am? I'm sorry.
Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you. I understand that you're brand new, but I'm curious if there is a term contract with the audit firm, or if you're just doing engagement letter by engagement letter. If you don't know, you can let me know.
I don't know.
We can speak to that.
Yeah.
It was done on over a 5-year period, and then we issue a new engagement letter each year for that. But the original RFP was for 5 years.
Thank you. Just to let you know, the city, I don't know if I should say suggests or requires, but the city directives state that an RFP should be done every 4 years.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Chair, as I said, for purpose of disclosure, I sit on the board of the Queens Library for the Public Advocate as an ex officio, non-voting member. So we have a lot of insight to the ongoings of the library, and I did want to state for the record that when the Public Advocate's Office a couple of years ago had asked for the Queens Library and others to come before, there was because of serious concerns over some of the management. There has been a new administration, many new trustees appointed, and I just wanted to make it clear to this board that the audit committee and the new management under Dennis Wilcott, who was selected as president of the library, has been implemented a number of measures to analyze and ensure the integrity of the system.
Sure.
But so I say that also because everyone is relatively new. Some of the historical questions that we had asked, for instance, of the Brooklyn Library, you may not have this information. And one of the issues that came up was the question of the book ops program that both Brooklyn and Manhattan, New York City, the New York Library have jointly collaborated on, and it was reflected, I don't know if you heard it when you were over there, that Queens opted out. They don't know why, So if you may not have that information as to what happened, several years ago.
Right.
I just would ask if possible to go back to Mr. Walcott and to the folks to go back into the records and see if that was a determination. The part of the responsibility of this board is to see potential risks to the city, but also to encourage efficiencies, and that seems to be a very good efficiency. Right. So perhaps go back and at some point reflect to the board if there was a recent decision or a new look at that, and what was the basis of that. And,
Okay, I certainly
but
will.
I can't ask you why because I understand.
Right. But thank you. I will definitely follow up as soon as I get back.
Was there a management letter?
This year?
No, not in the current year. We had issued in previous years management letters, and all our recommendations were implemented.
I get you. You're getting at the fact with the shenanigans. It's odd there isn't a management letter.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Walcott is the new
New president.
Yes.
With regards to the shenanigans, most of that occurred prior to our retention. All the instances that were discovered and reported were prior to our retention. And again, as I say, we used that as information when we developed our risk assessment for our audits. And if anything might possibly create a material misstatement in the financial statements, we believe as of the time of our periods that we audited that there were no material misstatements within that period.
Yeah.
So we didn't feel, we did have management letters in the past in the first couple of years, but as I say, everything was implemented. So this current year, there wasn't any. We had no audit adjustments. Our testing resulted in no audit adjustments, and the previous CFO had everything tied out and ready as soon as we got in for our audit, and the processes that were recommended from the consultant were all put in place as well. So,
Was the previous CFO Vishnu Dawa?
Michelle, speak up, please.
No, it was Tracy Yogman.
I see. Is Vishnu still there?
Vishnu is there, yes.
Because he's the person my office has coordinated with. So, thank you.
If I, because it goes to mentioning shenanigans. When you came on board, there was a ongoing New York City Comptroller audit and then an investigation as well that revealed a number of important issues. I think this one you can handle. There's been a series of significant internal controls and other audit, accounting practices that have been altered and modified in policies to address those concerns of the Comptroller's Office and of the board that did that, right?
Yes, that's correct. In fact, I'm still going through all of the policies and, making sure that everything is in place.
How long, ma'am, have you been there? I don't know.
Just since the beginning of November.
Good luck.
It's not good luck. It's not easy.
Yeah. But I think that's good because it also provides another fresh look at the way things have been done.
Right.
So.
Are there any more questions of the people from Queensborough Public Library? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll give you some stuff that you may want to treat from an editorial point of view.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah. All right. Jackie reminds me that we want to have a quick executive session. Folks, so I make a motion that we go into one?
Second.
Second, okay. Hearing no objections, we'll go into executive